Hello. Today we're looking at structure. So we're looking at how towards the final stages of the dissertation process you plan out and write your dissertation. So a suggested dissertation structure would look as follows. It would start with a table of contents which signposts where your information is. That would lead towards the introduction, which contains your thesis statement and a broad overview of your research. Then you might want to include a literature review, which would discuss your key research sources and how you've used them. What follows will be the bulk of your dissertation, your critical argument, and that might be arranged in 2, 3, 4 or even more chapters. Your conclusion will form the evaluation of your critical argument, and we'll touch on questions such as where the argument could go next. And finally, you can have your bibliography, which is a complete list of research sources, and information on how to compile a bibliography can be found on the critical studies pages of StudentNet. So we'll start with the table of contents. Now this lays out your chapter headings. It's a list. So here's an example. Chapter 2 title here for you might be the literature review, and it's likely that chapter 3, your critical argument, will have lots of subsections. You may want to include appendices. These are things like information that you've created from surveys or perhaps some illustrations you want to add afterwards. But an appendix is not compulsory. The bibliography is very important, however, because you don't want to be accused of plagiarism and you must cite your research sources. So let's look at the introduction. Now, the introduction should include a thesis statement, and this is a framework for your critical argument. And there's some information here that you can use if you want to. If you click on the links in this presentation, you'll be taken to the Royal Literary Fund or to the University of North Carolina Writing Centre. So the thesis statement is probably the question that you are asking, that your research concerns itself with. It might be a statement that you debate as well. It needs to be quite a broad topic, but not so broad that you're taking on the world. And your dissertation advisor is by far the best person to advise you as to whether he thinks or she thinks your thesis statement is appropriate or not. And don't panic if you don't feel you have one yet. You've got a long time to start to formulate one. And sometimes you don't find you really know what questions you're asking until a good 3/4 of a way through the dissertation process. Right, a question for you, which is why do most students write their introduction after they've written their conclusion? Well, with extended writing, like the dissertation, you'll find that your research keeps giving you new information. You keep changing kind of what you're writing about. As you become more aware of the topic that you're considering, the whole structure of your writing changes. So we suggest that you carry out your research, you find out your critical argument, you almost write your conclusion, and then you write your introduction outlining the aims and purpose of your dissertation. Because although you may feel you know the aims and purpose now, in the majority of cases this does change towards the end of the dissertation process. I'm going to talk briefly about the literature review. In a literature review, you discuss your key research sources and you mention their relationship to your argument and findings. You talk about kind of the key people you've read about and you evaluate what their argument might mean. So you might say something like, Walter Benjamin put forward an idea of aura, however one could consider that this was slightly outdated now, and further writers about artisan craftsmanship have different views as to regards the value of craft. Now that's just off the top of my head as an example, but you can see you're talking about your research source, but you're being quite careful to state their place in your argument as well. The best way to find out about literature reviews is to look on Google Scholar and to find an example of a recently published thesis and look at their literature review. Now obviously these will be doctoral students, and the literature reviews you see there will be far more fleshed out and far more kind of academic than we would expect you to write, but the principle remains the same. It shows your research and how it fits into the general picture of your dissertation. Again, your dissertation advisor is the person who is best able to support you in deciding whether including a separate literature review will benefit your work or not. Critical argument. What is it? And this is the question that is asked quite a lot during level 4, level 5 and level 6. And if you're in any doubt about it, please look at our level 4 course programs, our study skills program, which now has a complete video which deals totally with the idea of the critical argument. But the critical argument is like making something. You start off with this idea of what you want to make, but you have to decide which materials will be most effective into making this idea real. This is your research. So you might try out a range of ideas from research. And you think that sometimes they're starting to come together to create this object, your argument. You might find that the object that you originally set out to make has changed because of these materials, or you change your ideas about which materials will be suitable, and this often happens within the dissertation. The making process, in my analogy, the way you are choosing to make something, will inform the shape, size, texture and meaning of your object, and it is exactly the same with the dissertation. Your research will inform the shape, size, texture and meaning of your argument, because as you find different bits of research, you add them to your argument changes. Perhaps you change your mind about something, or there's more evidence on one side than the other. And however you feel about your outcome, and it may actually contrast with what you believe in, you're left with something, the dissertation, an object, which is a product of your ideas, your research, and your informed and critical choices. And this is crucial. The information that you find is out there, but you have to use it. You have to put it together to make something. The thing you make is your critical argument. And here's an excellent model for the critical argument. If you see here, it starts with your notes. This is your notes from research. So right at the bottom, you have all these notes from your research, and you put those together to make evidence. And this evidence goes together with further evidence to make the points that you might make. So point 1, point 2, point 3. So this is a model from Peter Brock's lectures last year, which students did find helpful. You need to put your notes together, order them into something that they're saying. Evidence for what? Evidence for something. Evidence for the point here. The point we're making. Your introduction and your conclusion fit around your critical argument. You start off by saying, I'm investigating this particular thing. I'm going to be making the following points, and they are based on this evidence from my notes, from my research. And what is really nice is if your dissertation can be ordered by your ideas. And really these points are your ideas because they are born from your investigations and how you feel and what you feel these investigations add to your overall topic. Theory and practice. Now this is usually evidenced through your application of key ideas from the subjects of your dissertation and how that fits in with theorists or theories that have been introduced to you in Practicing Context Level 5. So you are using these within your dissertation. You may not always agree with them. The other evidence you have found may support or disprove them, or they may be simply a tool for analysis you're using, such as semiotics. You may investigate an image using semiotic language. But these key theorists, these key ideas, applied to the subject of your dissertation. And the subject of your dissertation should be something that informs your studio practice. So you're almost looking at your dissertation subject, the work of your studio practice or something to do with your studio practice through the lens of these different theories. How might they shed light on this particular image or object? What do they add to it? What do they detract from it? Different perspectives at looking at your studio practice. Theory and practice is the hardest part of the assessment criteria to explain in any kind of lecture, let alone a video lecture, because it is extremely personal and it's totally related to who you are and the subject that you are studying. But think of it as a way of incorporating ideas of value and meaning from level 5 into your dissertation at level 6. And your conclusion. Your conclusion forms the final evaluation of your critical argument. So here you can address any implications or potential issues you have discovered through the synthesis of your research. So you look at your whole argument and you think, well, what implications are there? What was my argument? What did my research show? You summarise your research, you link it back to the question you asked in your introduction, or you write your introduction so that the question mimics the findings or mirrors the findings in your conclusion, and you talk about new ideas. You know, you have used your research, you have put together these ideas from your reading, and you applied them to an area of your own studio practice. And this is really important because you might find that these take on board a wider meaning when you place them in the context of everyday life or life as a contemporary practitioner. So start thinking about your research as something that could inform the work of others, or something that sits inside a particular context, the context of artist practice today. And you might find then there are potential issues that do actually affect contemporary art. This is, for me, the learning model for the dissertation. The basics here are ideas of application, of comprehension and knowledge, and this is Bloom's taxonomy, which is a model of learning. Your knowledge comes from your research. You understand your research and you apply your research to the area of practice. You apply it to your dissertation topic. You analyse your research. You come up with new ideas, new frameworks of thinking that might kind of actually have implications on a wider context, and then you evaluate your research. So, has this been useful? How effective have you addressed this question? What new kind of issues have you come across? Which particular research sources really influenced your argument? All sorts of questions you can ask yourself. So you understand your research, you apply it to a subject, you analyse your evidence, you see whether it supports your argument or presents counterclaims. You create new ideas and you evaluate the claims based in your research. I hope this has been helpful. The best person to ask is certainly your dissertation advisor. I don't want to forget about the reference list and bibliography because these are very important, but please do refer to our referencing website for how to correctly cite references in line, and do look at our online course for further information as well, our study skills course. The bibliography is effectively your references and your reading put together in one list. So it's nothing to panic about. You just have to make sure, and the key message here is make sure that you keep a very careful note of all the information that you found so far, and crucially where you found it. That way you won't have to backtrack and try and find out later where that particular bit of research came from. So just keep a note of the author and the date of books, or a list of URLs that you've used. If you're worried about plagiarism, there's an infographic here which is quite useful, and again you can click on the hyperlink and get a better quality image of this. I hope this has been helpful. Further support can be found using our own critical studies online resources, Study Plus, and crucially your dissertation supervisor, who will know you and your topic and will be able to advise you on such things as how you evidence theory and practice, which is the most difficult to do because it's not a sort of separate structured part of your dissertation. It's something that's threaded through your dissertation.